The more content that you can get your target audience to consume, that over time is what drives conversion. It's not any one source.
All right, to round us out today with question number 3, I want your take on something. I was doing some digging into our marketing numbers this week, and something just wasn't adding up. We track every marketing dollar, but many of our best cases come from sources we can't clearly identify. When we ask clients how they found us, they say things like, I found you online, or I remembered your name, but can't specify where exactly, so our team just puts down Google for anything online. My partners want to track ROI for every marketing spend, but I don't think attributing everything back to Google makes sense either. How do you budget for marketing that you can't directly measure?
We talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. It is, things aren't linear. It's very rare that somebody sees you for the first time and they click the ad and they reach out to your office and they sign up and become a client. That's extremely, extremely rare, because nowadays they've got to see you multiple times across numerous different mediums. And when you think about attribution, there's like first touch and then there's last touch. So the first touch could have been the first time that somebody saw an ad, or maybe they clicked and visited your website, or maybe they signed up for your newsletter or something like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what drove them to convert. And last touch was like, what do they do right before they got on the phone with you, right? Or what do they do right before they became a client? And sometimes the gap between first touch and last touch could be years.
Yeah.
Or like years. I mean, we have people that reach out to us and they're like, hey, I've listened to the podcast for 3.5 years.
And then today was the day.
And today was the day I decided to, sit down and do team.
Yeah.
Like, great. But here's the thing. We would never be able to track that because we don't get insight on who specifically is listening to the podcast. Like, we'll know, the number of like listeners and downloads. Same thing with the book. Like, we don't know exactly who out there in the world exactly has read the book unless they tell us. I mean, we see the number of like purchases of the book, and we can see the amount of people that visit the website about the book, and just even metrics on Amazon, but it doesn't tell us who does something specifically. So there's going to be some people that won't do something and won't do some form of marketing unless they can attribute a direct return from it. Like, if I put $1 in, I need to get $1.50 back. And if that's you, then you can buy leads and you can do pay-per-click and you can do LSAs and a lot of the almost like direct response short-term drivers. But if you're focusing on attracting really great cases, and that's going to require building a brand, then what that means is that there's going to be marketing that you do that you won't be able to attribute immediately. Like we just said, the book, the podcast, like even just if you're running like social ads, if you're doing traditional advertising, TV, radio, billboards, etc. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't do that. It just means that it's going to be very difficult to attribute to any one thing. It also means that if you're doing multiple forms of marketing, let's say like you run social ads and you do SEO and you do community events and you like sponsor a sports team and you're billboards, and somebody reaches out to you and they say, oh, how did you hear about us? And they'll say, oh, it was Google, right? Google gets the attribution, and someone will look at that and say, oh, it's always Google. But what compelled somebody? Because I always think it's interesting to ask them, what made you Google us, right? What made you search for us? Nowadays, people are also using AI and ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, ChatGPT said you were the best.
Yeah.
But then you have to wonder, well, why did ChatGPT say I was the best?
Yeah.
Right? We've done podcasts on that too. I think about this more so from the standpoint of it's not any one thing, it's numerous touch points. Sometimes it takes 30 plus touch points of somebody coming across you and your content, and over a span of weeks and months and sometimes years. And then on the day that they have the need that they do, right? Something happened in their life to them or to someone that they know, then they reach out. But were you top of mind during that time? So if the question is, well, how do we justify all this other type of marketing? I'll give you a straight answer on this, is that really look at what is your cost of acquisition and also incorporating your average case value, but look at it as a blended return on ad spend. So not just saying, okay, well, here's what we're spending on SEO, or here's what we're spending on pay-per-click, or here's what we're spending on social ads, or here's what we're spending on traditional advertising, but instead look at it as here's an aggregate of what we're spending, and here's the number of new cases that brought in, and here was the cost of acquisition on those cases. But then also cost of acquisition and lead cost, not all leads are created equal. You'd look at it and say, hey, that cost is too high. But if that lead ends up being a 7 or 8 figure trucking case, then you would say that's not too high, right? Because you would say, look, I'm not going to spend $10,000 to acquire a soft tissue auto accident case, but you would spend $10,000 to attract a 7 or 8 figure trucking case.
Yes.
So it's not even just based in terms of cost of acquisition. It's more so, what is your return on marketing in a blended form of just aggregating what are all the things that we were doing in terms of like our total marketing investment. Maybe you look at it quarterly, for example, and what does that represent in terms of intakes, and what is the average case value, and you being able to project There's also a lag, depending on the firm. If you're a contingency firm, for example, from the time that that case comes in to the time that the case settles, and that can be 12, 18 months, sometimes even more. So it's just being able to be able to project long term. And it's really realizing that the core concept we always drill in when we talk about this at conferences and workshops, et cetera, is that it's consumption that drives conversion. It is understanding that the more content that you can get your target audience and your ideal client, prospective client, to consume, whether it's across multiple mediums. Maybe you've got a book that they can read and a podcast that they listen to and an email newsletter that you send out, and you're at events, like you're community events, and you're handing out swag, and then you're passing out turkeys, and they're constantly seeing your content. That over time is what drives conversion. It's not any one source. So if you become very, very narrowly focused on saying, well, where did that person exactly come from? Really what you're tracking is what was their last point of attribution, like the last touch. What was the last thing they did before reaching out to us, without considering the full funnel and all the steps that person took. Because, they'll call and tell you, yeah, I heard about you. Like, how did you hear about us? At Google. And you say, okay, Google, right? SEO. That's what it is. But what they won't tell you is the fact that they have seen your ads 50 times and they've driven by your billboard and they've seen your commercials. Sometimes people don't even know what they do. We have a firm that, she'd asked them, how did you hear about us? And said, oh, I've seen your billboards. And she doesn't even have any billboards. Sometimes people don't remember.
Just like immersion. Yeah.
So you can follow the journey on digital. Offline, it gets a little bit trickier to do that, but it's not being so tied down to, I need to know every single step they took and every breath they took and every click they made and et cetera. And not just obsessing to that degree, and more so looking at it from the perspective, if I can look at what is the consumption of our content as a whole, and then correlating that to conversion in terms of intakes and then signed cases, and then evaluating other metrics like cost of acquisition, but not being just drawn to that entirely, really looking at it from the standpoint of average case value, and looking at it as a true blended cost of here's everything that we're spending on marketing over this period of time, and what that resulted in terms of the intakes and the quality of the intakes, and looking at this now, maybe not even just a quarter, maybe a year or more at a time. But it's recognizing that everything it's like the halo effect.
Yeah.
Like things build upon each other. You're going to have one type, if you're only doing one type of advertising, and that's the only thing you're doing, yes, it's easier to track. But as you start doing more and more things, it can, of course, add some complexity, but it also, each additional form of marketing supports the other, and them seeing you on different channels and engaging with you in different ways, it really does support you remaining top of mind and driving that consumption, which ultimately leads to conversion. So that's the way I would look at it. You're really treating it as a blended cost instead of trying to get direct attribution from everything you're doing, because, again, you'll get last touch attribution. You'll get the last thing that they did, the last thing that they clicked, but it doesn't tell you much about all the steps that they took leading up to that, whether it was online or even offline.
Yeah.
Right? How many of you know that, like, hey, we were doing a community event and they walked by our booth?
Right.
Like, how do you track that?
Yeah.
It's keeping a track on the metrics. I'm not saying that you should ignore them entirely. Like, you should absolutely have like a pulse on the metrics themselves, but not allowing those decisions, like basically the metrics alone, to dictate every single decision that you make. Because if you're strictly looking at things in terms of, if I put $1 in, I get $1.50 back, you're going to do yourself a disservice in some of the things that could be most beneficial to you, of having a longer time horizon and really considering what builds brand, what increases our share of voice, what builds trust within our community. Not everything has to have a direct return. Truly, you don't go out and say, hey, we're going to do this community event. We're going to hand out a bunch of turkeys and we hope we get a lot of clients from it. You do it because it's the right thing to do, and that helps build brand equity. And you may not get a client directly from there, or you may.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'll actually give you a prime example. Our workshops a couple weeks ago, I was talking to a firm, and he said that he started a podcast, and 4 months into his podcast, he gets somebody who, I think it was like a high 7-figure case. And he's like, I'm really glad I started this podcast, because he's been practicing for over a decade. 4 months in, gets a 7-figure case because the person happened to be sitting at the hospital, and they'd done some like geo-targeting around the hospital. They listened to the podcast and they reached out and said, I heard your podcast specifically. They got like direct attribution on it. Say like, I listened to this podcast and I want to hire you as my attorney. Now, here's the problem with this. And I told him, like, look, if you tell everybody else in the workshops about this, number one, everyone's going to start podcasts. But number two, they're going to get mad at you if 4 months go by and they don't get a high 7-figure case, right? So you just happen to get very lucky there. And it's great that you did that. But then there's going to be people who have podcasts that run them for years and may not see that return. but it doesn't mean you shouldn't start a podcast. It still could be a very, very valuable form of marketing, but he didn't start the podcast to get cases. He started the podcast to be helpful and to interview people in his community and to build trust and credibility. And it just so happened that it led to a case.
It doesn't hurt.
For what it's worth, it can be complicated, but don't be tied to any one source or any one direct source of attribution.